The bartender had exactly one chance to be wrong. The moment the glass touched his lips, it was over. The club was packed. The lighting was low. And a Korean mafia boss sat surrounded by men paid to kill without hesitation. No one noticed the bartender staring too long at the table. No one noticed her hand tighten around the towel. The drink looked perfect. That was the problem. She stepped forward. The glass shattered before the thought could fully form. Silence collapsed the room. Every guard reacted at once. Every exit locked. And the boss stared at the liquid, dripping from his sleeve like it had betrayed him. Across from him stood the bartender, pulse racing, fully aware she had just interrupted a man whose patience did not exist. If she had imagined the danger, she would be punished publicly. And if she had, this was only the beginning. If your heart skipped a beat just like Brielle, hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of how this dangerous obsession unfolds. No one spoke. The silence pressed harder than the music ever had. Kim Tae-yong didn't move right away. He studied the table, the shattered glass, the droplets staining his cuff like evidence. Around him, bodyguards stood half-drawn, waiting for permission that hadn't come. The bartender felt every second stretch. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She kept her hands visible. One wrong movement would be interpreted as a confession. A guard stepped closer. Another closed the distance behind her. Kim lifted a finger. Everything stopped. He finally looked at her, not with anger, with interest. "Why," he asked quietly, "did you touch my drink?" Her throat tightened. The truth sounded insane. The lie sounded safer. She chose neither. She looked past him, to the untouched glass beside his plate. "Because that one wasn't the only problem," she said. A murmur rippled through the room. Kim followed her gaze. His expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He signaled again. No one moved. The bartender realized something too late. Stopping the drink wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a test. And failing it would mean dying where everyone could see. The club pulsed with bodies pressed too close, and music turned loud enough to hide intentions. Neon lights cut through smoke, washing faces in color that made everyone look dangerous or disposable depending on where they stood. This was not a place for innocence. It was a place where deals were sealed with glances, where betrayal wore expensive cologne, and where predators blended in as easily as guests. At the center of it all sat Kim Tae-yong. A Korean mafia boss didn't need to announce himself. The room adjusted around him without being told. Chairs angled subtly away. Conversations bent lower when his name drifted through the air. His black suit was immaculate, untouched by sweat or chaos, and his posture was relaxed in a way that warned everyone he was never unguarded. Men flanked him, silent, disciplined, paid to kill without hesitation. Their eyes moved constantly, mapping threats, exits, faces that lingered too long. Brielle Johnson felt the tension long before anyone acted on it. From behind the bar, she saw the club differently. She noticed the pauses between movements, the hands that hovered near jackets, the smiles that didn't reach eyes. Years of bartending in dangerous rooms had taught her one rule: when powerful men gathered quietly, something ugly followed. She poured drinks with steady hands, forcing her breathing to stay even. As a black bartender in a room like this, survival depended on being invisible. You did your job, you didn't stare, you didn't ask questions. But tonight, the air felt heavy in a way she couldn't shake. It wasn't the usual violence simmering beneath the music. It was something more deliberate, planned. Her eyes drifted back to Kim's table despite herself. The drinks had been set down too neatly. One glass, positioned closest to him, caught the light in a way that felt wrong. The liquid inside settled too cleanly, too still. No condensation ring, no careless fingerprint. Perfect things in places like this were never accidental. Around the room, the crowd shifted. A man near the wall checked his phone and slid it away. Another leaned into a whisper, his gaze never leaving the table. A woman laughed too loudly, nerves bleeding through the sound. Brielle clocked the exits again, one blocked by dancers, one guarded, one already closed. The club was a cage dressed up as a celebration. Kim moved his hand slightly, a small gesture that sent a ripple through his men. Jackets parted, feet adjusted, predators preparing without revealing their teeth. Brielle's pulse climbed. This was the moment that separated witnesses from victims. She told herself to look away, to focus on the bar, to trust that whatever was coming wasn't her problem. But her eyes returned to the glass, still untouched, still wrong. The title of the night hadn't been written yet, but the setup was clear. A Korean mafia boss, a crowded club full of predators, and a black bartender standing between silence and disaster. When Kim finally reached for the drink, the room leaned forward with him. And Brielle understood, with terrifying clarity, that the danger wasn't approaching. It was already at the table. Brielle Johnson had learned long ago that danger never announced itself. It hid in details people were too busy, too arrogant, or too distracted to see. In clubs like this, where a Korean mafia boss could sit openly among predators and pretend it was just another night, survival belonged to those who noticed what didn't fit. She watched hands more than faces. Faces lied. Hands didn't. She saw who held their glass too carefully, who never drank, who kept checking reflections instead of the room. She noted the rhythm of the staff, the timing of service, the way certain drinks arrived seconds earlier than expected. Patterns mattered. Breaks in them mattered more. The glass at Kim Tae-young's table broke every rule. It hadn't been poured by her. She was certain of that. Brielle remembered every order, every bottle uncapped, every garnish placed. Memory was her armor. This glass had appeared without her awareness, sliding into position like it had always belonged there. Perfect placement, perfect timing. Her eyes narrowed. The liquid inside didn't cling to the sides the way it should. It didn't fog the glass in the warm air. Instead, it sat still, heavy, almost patient. She leaned slightly to the left, just enough to catch the light at a different angle. There, barely visible, a faint shimmer that vanished when the music stuttered and the bass dipped. Poison wasn't supposed to look dramatic. That was the point. Real poison waited quietly. Quick, hit the like button if you sense the danger before anyone else did. Only the sharpest eyes catch a trap this quiet. Are you watching closely? Because the next move changes everything. Around her, the club carried on. Laughter burst from a nearby booth. A server squeezed past with a tray. A bodyguard shifted, blocking her view for half a second. When he moved again, the glass was still there. Untouched. Waiting. Brielle's mouth went dry. If she was wrong, she would die for nothing. Worse, she would die loudly. Publicly. A lesson written in blood for anyone who forgot their place. Black women in rooms like this were expected to endure, not interrupt. She glanced at Kim Tae-young. His posture was relaxed, but his attention was elsewhere, on the men speaking to him, on a deal that looked finished. He trusted the room. He trusted his power. That trust made him vulnerable. Her instincts screamed, not panic, focus. The same instinct that had kept her alive when others weren't so lucky. She scanned the table again. Another glass sat nearby, identical. That one showed condensation, fingerprints, human error. The wrong glass was meant for him. Brielle's hand tightened around the towel until her knuckles ached. She weighed the seconds, the distance, the outcome. This was the moment that defined everything that came after. Kim's hand moved toward the drink. Brielle stepped out from behind the bar. The decision wasn't brave. It was necessary. And as she crossed the floor toward a Korean mafia boss with a poisoned drink waiting for him, Brielle Johnson understood exactly what she was risking, and exactly why she couldn't stop. The glass waited at the edge of the table like it belonged there, catching the club's lights with a deceptive calm. It sat closer to Kim Tae-young than any other drink, positioned for a smooth, effortless reach. In a room full of predators, placement was never accidental. Every inch of space around a Korean mafia boss was calculated, protected, controlled. And yet this glass had slipped through unnoticed. Brielle crossed the floor with measured steps, each one echoing louder in her chest than in the club. The music still pounded, the crowd still moved, but her world narrowed to that table. She registered details automatically, the angle of Kim's wrist as he turned toward the men beside him, the way his bodyguard's attention drifted just enough for someone to act. A perfect window. Too perfect. The drink looked pristine, clear liquid, clean rim, No scent strong enough to raise suspicion. Poison at this level wasn't sloppy. It didn't announce itself with color or foam. It waited. That was what terrified her. Whoever set this up understood Kim Tae-yong's world intimately. They knew his habits, his preferences, the rhythm of his security. This wasn't an outsider's mistake. It was an insider's move. Kim reached for the glass. Time fractured. Brielle closed the remaining distance without thinking. Her hand moved before fear could catch up. The towel slipped from her fingers as she struck the glass sideways, shattering it against the table with a sharp, final sound that cut through the music like a gunshot. Crystal exploded. Liquid sprayed across black silk. The club died instantly. Every predator in the room revealed itself in the same breath. Guards surged forward. Jackets parted. Weapons hovered just out of sight. Doors slammed shut as exits locked. The air thickened with the promise of violence. Kim froze, staring at the liquid dripping from his sleeve as if it had personally betrayed him. His expression didn't explode. It hardened. Shock gave way to calculation in a heartbeat. Brielle stood across from him, her hand still raised, pulse hammering so hard she could taste metal. She knew what touching a mafia boss's drink meant. It was a violation of hierarchy, of survival, of every unspoken rule that kept people like her alive. If she had chosen the wrong glass, this would be her last moment. Silence stretched. The crowd held its breath. Kim slowly lifted his gaze to her face. For the first time that night, he didn't see staff. He saw interference. Around them, predators waited for the signal to strike. Brielle met his eyes and understood the truth too late. The wrong glass on the right table wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. And breaking, it had just placed her at the center of a war that was never meant to include her. Brielle felt hesitation claw up her spine the moment the glass shattered. It came fast and cruel, whispering that she'd gone too far, that survival meant apologizing, backing away, lowering her eyes and waiting for mercy that never came in rooms like this. Her instincts warred with her fear, each demanding control of her body. The silence pressed in, heavy, watching. Kim Tae-yong didn't shout. He didn't move. That was the most terrifying part. A Korean mafia boss didn't need noise to command death. His stillness did the work for him. His men read it instantly, every muscle coiled, every breath measured. They were waiting for her to make one more mistake. Brielle's hands trembled. She forced them to still. Any sign of panic would be read as guilt. Any plea would be read as weakness. She had survived too long to forget the rules now. In a crowded club full of predators, hesitation wasn't harmless. It was fatal. Her mind raced through the seconds she'd ignored before stepping forward. The safer choice had been silence. Let the drink be lifted. Let the poison do its job. Let the consequences belong to someone else. That was how people stayed alive on the edges of power, by pretending they didn't see. But she had seen. Kim's gaze stayed on her, sharp and unblinking. He was deciding whether she was an inconvenience or a threat. Brielle understood that her life hinged on which conclusion he reached. Survival meant committing to the interruption she'd started. Half-truths wouldn't save her. Retreat wouldn't save her. A bodyguard shifted closer. She felt the presence behind her like a closing door. Brielle swallowed and made herself speak. "That glass wasn't poured here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It didn't come from my bar." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Doubt crept in, unwelcome but undeniable. Kim glanced at the table, then at the second drink untouched. He didn't pick it up. That hesitation, his hesitation, sent a quiet shock through the room. Brielle pressed on before fear could silence her. "It doesn't behave like alcohol," she added. "No condensation, no scent, it's waiting." Waiting. The word hung there, heavy with implication. If she was wrong, she would be punished publicly, an example made in front of everyone watching. A black bartender who forgot her place. A warning written in blood. She knew that. The knowledge burned behind her eyes. But if she was right, then hesitation had already cost too much time. Kim lifted his hand slowly, not toward a weapon, toward his men. The signal was subtle but absolute. They stopped advancing. For the first time since the glass shattered, Brielle breathed. She realized then that survival wasn't about being right or wrong. It was about choosing action over fear and standing in it long enough for the truth to surface. In that moment, hesitation lost. And Brielle Johnson, the bartender who smashed the glass, understood she had crossed a line she could never step back over. The moment Brielle acted was quieter than anyone expected. No shouting, no dramatic warning, just a decision snapping into place as cleanly as a trigger being pulled. Kim Tae-yong's eyes flicked once more to the table. His fingers hovered near the second glass. The room leaned with him, every predator tracking the movement. This was the moment the title of the night would be sealed. Either the Korean mafia boss drank, or he didn't. Brielle didn't wait for permission. She stepped closer, past the invisible boundary that separated staff from power. The air shifted instantly. A bodyguard reached out, fingers brushing her sleeve. She shook him off without looking back. "Don't," she said, not loud, not pleading, certain. Her hand came down flat on the table, knocking the second glass just enough for liquid to slosh against the rim. The reaction was immediate. The shimmer bloomed, faint but undeniable, like oil catching light. A collective inhale rippled through the club. Kim froze. Brielle's pulse hammered, but her focus sharpened. This was no longer about instinct. It was about proof. Survival demanded evidence. She grabbed a clean spoon from a nearby tray and dipped it into the liquid. The metal darkened almost instantly, discoloration crawling up the surface in a way no alcohol ever did. "Poison," someone whispered. The word moved faster than sound. Chairs scraped back. Men reached for weapons before stopping themselves. Exits locked tighter. The club transformed from a playground into a kill zone in seconds. Kim Tae-yong straightened slowly, power radiating off him in waves. He didn't look at Brielle at first. He looked at his table, at the betrayal sitting inches from where his mouth had been. The realization hit hard and cold. This wasn't a random attempt. This was intimate, planned by someone who expected him to drink without question. Only then did he turn to her. "You were willing to die to stop this," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Brielle met his gaze. Her hands shook now that the action was done, adrenaline flooding in behind the fear. "I was willing to be wrong," she replied. "I wasn't willing to stay quiet." Do you feel that tension shifting? That isn't just gratitude in his eyes. That's fascination. Drop a comment saying saved if you think Brielle just walked into a romance darker and deeper than she can imagine. Silence followed, heavy, evaluating. Kim lifted a hand again. This time his men moved, not toward her but outward. They seized glasses, blocked exits, pulled people aside for inspection. The predators in the room realized too late they were no longer hunting. They were being hunted. Brielle stepped back, heart racing, aware that acting had changed everything. The black bartender who smashed the glass had just saved a Korean mafia boss from drinking poison in a crowded club full of enemies. And in doing so, she had made herself unforgettable. As Kim Tae-yong walked past her, his voice brushed her ear. "You don't leave tonight," he said calmly. "Not until I know who wanted me dead." Brielle understood then that her action hadn't ended the danger. It had only redirected it. And now, the next move belonged to him. The music never came back. The DJ's hands hovered uselessly over the controls as the last note died, swallowed by a silence so complete it rang in Brielle's ears. Neon lights still pulsed, but they felt wrong now, too bright, too exposed. The club had crossed an invisible line. It was no longer a place to celebrate. It was a holding cell. Guns shifted. Not raised, not fired, just repositioned. That was worse. Kim Tae-yong's men moved with practiced calm, jackets opening just enough to remind everyone what lived beneath the fabric. The predators who had filled the room minutes earlier felt the balance tip. Some froze. Some tried to look smaller. A few made the mistake of looking toward the exits, only to find them sealed by men who didn't blink. Brielle stood where Kim had left her, heart still racing, adrenaline burning down into something colder. She felt eyes on her from every direction, curious, resentful, afraid. A black bartender in the center of a mafia storm. The woman who smashed the glass. The woman who stopped the poison. A guard stepped close, his presence heavy at her shoulder. She didn't flinch. Flinching invited conclusions. Across the room, Kim moved slowly, deliberately, as if the chaos belonged to him. His gaze swept the club, cataloging faces, reactions, mistakes. This was his territory again. Whoever had tried to poison him had miscalculated one thing. Survival didn't end with the drink. "Everyone stays," Kim said calmly. The words didn't need amplification. They traveled through the room like a command written into bone. Phones were confiscated, tables were cleared, glasses lined up for inspection. The club staff were herded to one side, confusion etched into their faces. Guests who had come to watch deals now realized they were part of one. Brielle watched it unfold, understanding the shift with sick clarity. The danger had changed shape. Before, it had been a poisoned glass inches from a Korean mafia boss's lips. Now it was the quiet certainty that someone in this room had expected him to die tonight. And that someone was still here. Kim stopped in front of a man near the back, a well-dressed regular who had laughed too loudly earlier. The laughter was gone now. Sweat darkened his collar. Kim studied him for a long second, then moved on. No accusation, no explanation, just pressure. The room cracked under it. Brielle felt the weight settle on her shoulders, too. Saving Kim Taeyong hadn't made her safe. It had made her relevant. In rooms like this, relevance was dangerous. A guard finally spoke to her, voice low. "You don't move unless told." She nodded once. From across the room, Kim's eyes met hers again, not with suspicion, with assessment. She had interrupted death and survived. That made her an anomaly, and anomalies were never ignored. The music stayed dead. The guns stayed ready. And Brielle understood that the night had shifted permanently. The poison hadn't killed the Korean mafia boss, but it had exposed something far more lethal. A hunt had begun. Kim Taeyong didn't test people with questions. He tested them with silence. Brielle felt it the moment he stopped in front of her. The room seemed to pull back, predators holding their breath as the Korean mafia boss studied the black bartender who had shattered his glass and exposed the poison meant for him. His gaze was steady, unreadable, stripping away excuses, fear, and performance. "Tell me again," he said quietly, "why you touched my drink." This time, it wasn't curiosity. It was a verdict waiting to happen. Brielle's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed that the wrong answer would end her life right here, in a crowded club full of armed men. She could feel the weight of their attention, the tension in their hands, the readiness to obey whatever signal Kim gave next. She didn't rush. "I didn't touch it because I was brave," she said. "I touched it because it didn't belong." Kim's eyes narrowed slightly. She continued, forcing herself to stay calm. "The glass wasn't poured by my bar. No condensation, no fingerprints. The liquid settled too clean. Whoever put it there wanted you comfortable, wanted you distracted." A murmur rippled through the room. Kim raised a finger. Silence snapped back into place. "And the poison?" he asked. Brielle met his gaze. "Wasn't meant to be obvious. It was meant to wait, long enough to kill you quietly or kill everyone else if panic broke out." Kim let that hang. Then he turned sharply and lifted another glass from a different table. He held it out to her. "Prove it," he said. Her pulse spiked. This was the test, not of observation, but of conviction. Brielle took the glass. Her hands trembled as she compared it to the poisoned one. Same size, same cut, but the difference was there if you knew how to look. She tilted it under the light. The liquid clung differently. It breathed. "This one's clean," she said, "because no one expects you to drink from the wrong table." Kim watched her closely as she set it down. Then, without warning, he nodded to one of his men. The man dragged a shaking guest forward, the one who had checked his phone too often, who had watched the table instead of the room. Sweat poured down his face. "You said you didn't pour the drink," Kim said to Brielle. "Who did?" Brielle swallowed. This was the moment hesitation returned, sharp and dangerous. Nomming someone could make her an accomplice or a target. But truth was the only currency that mattered now. "Not the staff," she said firmly. "Someone who could move freely, someone trusted enough not to be questioned." Kim studied the man on his knees. The silence broke. "Take him," Kim ordered calmly. The man screamed as he was pulled away, his fate sealed. Kim turned back to Brielle. His expression had changed, not softened, but sharpened with something else. Respect. You didn't guess, he said. You saw. Brielle realized, then, what the test had really been. The poison hadn't been the only threat. He had been testing her truth. And she had passed. She didn't just survive, she dominated that room. If you love a heroine who uses her brain as a weapon, smash that like button. Let's show the algorithm we demand women who know how to handle a boss. Which meant she wasn't just the bartender who smashed the glass anymore. She was now part of the reason a Korean mafia boss was still alive, and part of whatever came next. The truth didn't arrive with drama. It surfaced slowly, like something long submerged finally breaking water. Kim Tae-yong stood still as his men moved through the club, pulling apart the night piece by piece. Glasses were lined up under harsh light. Bottles were uncapped, tested, set aside. Faces were studied harder than the drinks. The Korean mafia boss didn't rush this part. Whoever had planned the poison had counted on chaos. Kim answered with control. Brielle watched from where she stood, hands clasped tight enough to ache. The adrenaline had begun to fade, replaced by a creeping dread that this wasn't finished. The poisoned glass had been obvious only because she knew where to look. That meant something worse had been designed to stay hidden. A bodyguard approached Kim and murmured something too low for anyone else to hear. Kim's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He glanced back at the table, then at the surrounding crowd. "Bring them," he said. 3 more glasses were placed in a line, not from his table, from different corners of the club, different servers, different guests. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Brielle leaned forward despite herself, eyes narrowing. Her stomach dropped. "They're not all the same," she said quietly, "but they're not meant to be." Kim looked at her. "Explain." Brielle took a breath. The poison wasn't designed for one drink. It was designed for confusion, small doses, spread out. If you'd gone down, panic would have followed. People would have grabbed whatever was closest. Security would have reacted. Guns drawn. A crowded club full of predators with poisoned drinks and no exits. The room shifted. Kim's gaze hardened. The realization landed fully now. This hadn't been a clean assassination. It had been a massacre waiting for permission. "They didn't want just you dead," Brielle continued. "They wanted a scene, bodies, chaos, a message." Kim nodded slowly. The implication was clear. Killing a Korean mafia boss was one thing. Turning his territory into a blood-soaked warning was another. Someone wanted to destabilize everything, his alliances, his reputation, his control. And in that chaos, Kim said, finishing the thought, the real target disappears. Brielle met his eyes. Yes. Silence spread again, heavier than before. Kim turned sharply to his men. Orders followed in quick, controlled bursts. The remaining drinks were seized. Certain guests were separated from the rest. Phones were taken. Names were whispered and logged. The club was no longer just a crime scene. It was evidence. Brielle felt the weight of it settle. She hadn't stopped a single death. She had stopped many. And by doing so, she had altered the outcome someone powerful had paid dearly to ensure. Kim faced her again, his expression unreadable. "You didn't just save my life," he said. "You stopped a war from starting in my name." The words hit harder than any threat. Brielle understood then that the poison's real target had never been just Kim Tae-yong. It had been his world. And by smashing the glass, the black bartender had stepped directly into it. Brielle realized she couldn't walk away the moment the doors finally unlocked, and no one rushed for them. The crowd didn't scatter, they waited. Kim Tae-yong stood near the center of the club, composed as ever, as if the poison, the panic, and the near-death experience had been nothing more than an inconvenience. His men remained positioned with quiet authority, a living barrier between him and the rest of the world. The Korean mafia boss hadn't just survived an assassination attempt. He had absorbed it, folded it into his control. Brielle felt the shift settle around her like a closing circle. "Come," Kim said, his voice calm, carrying easily through the space. It wasn't a request. She hesitated for half a second, long enough to remember who she'd been an hour ago. A black bartender, invisible by necessity. Someone who wiped counters, poured drinks, and went home alive by keeping her head down. That version of her no longer fit the room. She stepped forward. Eyes followed her, some curious, some resentful, some afraid. The bartender who smashed the glass now walked beside a mafia boss whose enemies had nearly turned a crowded club into a slaughterhouse. Every predator present understood what that meant. Kim led her past the bar, past the shattered glass still glittering on the floor like frozen evidence. His presence parted the space effortlessly. Brielle kept her hands steady, her breathing controlled, even as the reality sank in. She was leaving the safety of anonymity behind. They stopped near a private exit. Kim turned to face her. "You saw what others didn't," he said. "You acted when silence would have been safer." Brielle met his gaze. "I didn't do it for power." "I know," Kim replied. "That's why it matters." The words landed with weight. In his world, intention was currency. Survival was selective, and she had just proven herself valuable in a way that couldn't be undone. "You can return to the bar," Kim continued. "Pretend tonight ends here." Her heart pounded. That was the door, the last one. "And if I do?" she asked quietly. Kim's expression didn't change. "Then you step into my world, and my world doesn't let people leave who know what you now know." Brielle understood the truth in that statement immediately. The poison had been designed to start a war. Someone powerful had wanted Kim Tae-yong dead and his territory destabilized. Those people would want to know how their plan failed. And they would find her. She thought of the glass, of the shimmer, of the moment everything had changed. "I won't pretend," she said. Kim nodded once, approval, acceptance. A car pulled up outside, engine idling low. One of his men opened the door. As Brielle stepped toward it, she felt the weight of the night lock into place. She wasn't being taken hostage. She was being recruited by circumstance. The black bartender who smashed the glass was gone. In her place stood a woman who had saved a Korean mafia boss from drinking poison and crossed into a world of power, danger, and consequence she could never walk away from again. The car door is open, and there is no turning back. Make sure you are subscribed with the bell turned on. You are part of this family now, and the next episode is going to break every rule. Don't be the one left outside.